Welcome to the latest installment of ABL Advisors Thought Leadership video series, where we feature thought leaders from the commercial finance industry. I'd like to welcome today's guest, George Sori, Chief Executive Officer of LQD Business Finance. Thanks for joining us today, George.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is ours. I'd like to start right in on today's conversation with you, and I'm going to touch on what's been in the news most recently about you and your company, and that is that LQD Business Finance recently announced the launch of the world's first Bitcoin business lending platform, the first to use Bitcoin as a lending currency. Now, this is groundbreaking. So can you tell us a little bit about this cutting edge platform that you're developing?
Yes, so there's actually two sides to the platform, right? One side relates to how do you use blockchain to make the securitization of loans more efficient, right? So normally in sort of traditional securitization, you would have, series of loans, and then you would have a series of sort of middlemen or middle firms. You would have a custodian, perhaps. You would have a trustee, right? And the idea is that those agents, so to speak, are intended to create the trust between the originator and the securitization markets. But what that does is it adds a lot of transactional inefficiency and cost. A blockchain, because it's a trustless system, right? The idea is you can't manipulate a blockchain. That's the whole point of the distributed ledger. What it essentially does is it allows us to, or lending companies generally, it allows you to take your loans and all of the related documents relating to a loan. So, if in the case of a commercial loan, that might be the loan and security agreement, that may be this, UCC filings. In the case of a mortgage, it might be the mortgage document, the title, those related documents. Essentially take all of that and put it in a block, if you will. And then offer that block on an exchange, if you will, for purchase by an investor or an institution. And what that does is it removes those layers of middlemen, if you will, and increases not only the efficiency, but the confidence of the transaction, right? So on one side, you can use blockchain technology writ large to make the packaging and securitization of loans a more efficient and transparent process. The borrower-facing side, and now keep in mind, blockchain is independent of any given cryptocurrency necessarily, right? The other side relating to Bitcoin as a lending currency is a function of the trend that we're seeing of cryptocurrencies being not only a store for value, but actually a usable currency, right? And the idea is that the trend more and more is we're going to be able to use cryptocurrencies to go out and buy things, right? It's not just I own some crypto and I want to see what the price is as if it's a commodity. It's I'm going to be able to take my Bitcoin card and swipe it at a retailer somewhere and buy a coffee or buy a Tesla or whatever it is. Now, the complexities of actually making that practicable go beyond just treating crypto as another currency, as if you're trading in euros or dollars. And so we're trying to get ahead of the curve by introducing this platform.
Okay, so does that mean that you're not seeing the need for this necessarily today and you're building it because of demand you're anticipating in the future, or is there demand today?
No, I think there's a good deal of demand today. The question is figuring out how to serve that demand, right? So, in theory, there's a lot of demand for self-driving cars, but you have to solve the problem of making the self-driving car in order to serve that demand. So while demand is there, it requires an infrastructure in order for that demand to be served. Because at the end of the day, in our case, we make business loans. Businesses don't want to borrow in Bitcoin just for the sake of borrowing in Bitcoin. They want to, they need the loan to go out and buy their inventory or to finance their receivables or to make investments in operating expenses. And so as Bitcoin becomes a mainstream currency, we want to have the infrastructure in place that enables the use of Bitcoin to serve those business-related expenditures the same way you would spend in dollars.
So have you, out of curiosity, have you spoken to borrowers about the capability of doing this? I know obviously you've been thinking about it from the lender perspective, but how about from the borrower side?
We have, and our research and in speaking with borrowers, it's something they find very exciting. There are aspects of sort of what we're proposing in terms of sort of counterparty and currency hedging aspects of this that actually play out in scenarios that are very favorable to the borrower, right? And so borrowers like the idea of, not all borrowers entirely, especially in our case, we're serving sort of lower middle market borrowers. They don't entirely understand blockchain. So we do a lot of work in educating on what blockchain is. We want to talk about Bitcoin as a usable currency. So part of this is also in the development is really investing in an education campaign because transparency is one of the core values at LQD. And it's very important for us to make sure that, ultimately we serve our borrowers. That's our core mission. And so a big part of that as it relates to innovations that would be helpful to borrowers is educating the borrowers on how to best use those innovations and what exactly the benefits are of using those innovations.
Okay, now are you doing this today yet, or is it still in the development process?
We're still in dev, so we're not currently making any loans in Bitcoin. It's a complicated process because there are certain phases to this, right? So even if tomorrow, in theory, I wanted to lend in Bitcoin, there's this question of, if I'm a borrower, how do I use your Bitcoin to buy inventory from China, right? Now, ultimately, that's a really nice transaction because if I can use Bitcoin to buy inventory in China, then the whole currency question, a lot of the messiness of global trade sort of goes away. But right now, maybe I can't do that. So the idea is there are other benefits related to borrowing in Bitcoin, and there are holders of Bitcoin that want to, sort of monetize the holding of Bitcoin beyond the price. The idea is if I'm holding dollars and I put it, let's say, a money market account, I can get some interest on it, or I can take my cash and I can put it in, let's say, private debt instruments, right? I can invest it that way and make a return. Well, if I'm a holder of Bitcoin today, my options for investing my Bitcoin, in other words, making money on my capital above and beyond the appreciation of the asset, are limited. And so one of the things we're doing is we're solving that intermediary gap between a world that still deals largely in fiat currency while making Bitcoin a transferable form of currency. And then the second phase is as Bitcoin becomes more and more accepted, as essentially a fiat type currency, we would be, vertical leader on actually rolling out currency transactions in Bitcoin.
A true leadership position from that perspective. Now, what types of loans will this Bitcoin platform service? You mentioned securitization. Are there other things you have in mind right now as far as different types of lending products?
Right. So the beauty of I think this whole platform and the whole Bitcoin idea is that we're not doing anything, we're not reinventing the wheel, right? Commercial lending is commercial lending. ABL lending is ABL lending, right? One of the core premises, so, LQD is a technology-enabled lender, but one of the core principles that we've always had is that we know how to underwrite credit responsibly. And we don't want to reinvent that wheel, right? We don't want to use sort of, voodoo black box underwriting. The problem is that finance doesn't know how to underwrite efficiently while maintaining accuracies, right? So usually the trade-off is if you go faster and cheaper, you lose accuracy. If you want to increase the accuracy, you go slower and it costs more. The thing LQD has been able to achieve, and this is really our innovation, is not some voodoo black box credit decisioning system. It's how do you take a complex transactional process, reduce the time, reduce the cost, while also increasing the accuracy, right? So this is called process compression, right? So we're doing everything exactly the same way. You're still going to have your ABL facilities. You're still going to have your term facilities. The underwriting is exactly the same, right? The only difference is that rather than being US dollars, it's Bitcoin. And on the back end, rather than using, things like custodians and all these different sort of current structures and agents, we're going to be doing that through a blockchain in the marketplace. So this really just forwards our core mission, which is, LQD's fundamental mission is we think lenders are not as profitable as they should be because all of their processes and all of their data management are manual, right? So it's not about credit decisioning. We're good at credit decisioning as an industry. We're just not good at doing it with any form of efficiency whatsoever. And so this move into expanding our platform capacity is just another step towards forwarding that core mission of introducing increased efficiency with increased accuracy into a historically very inefficient and manually driven process.
Okay, my final question on this portion of it is, do you see that others will follow what you're doing in the future?
I think they'll try. I think one of my affectionate critiques of finance, and you're talking to someone who's been in finance for 20 some odd years, right? So this is an affectionate critique reflectively, is that we don't think about innovation as a core principle in finance, right? In the 50s, they would put up numbers on chalkboards that were 3-story talls, and you'd have guys up on ladders writing the numbers in. And they would use IBM punch card machines, right? Well, today we've replaced the chalkboard with Excel, and we've replaced the punch card machine with a laptop. But everything in between is still exactly the same. So whereas, you look at Amazon, right? Introducing cloud computing into retail, introducing robots into logistics, introducing, for example, drone delivery as another innovation, right? So there are companies that understand innovation as a core aspect of what they do. Manufacturing, is when Henry Ford introduced the assembly line, that's an example of this, right? Finance has never really been big on innovating from an operational perspective, right? We're clever in terms of financial engineering, things like mortgage-backed securities and whatnot. But innovation has never been at the core. And so to do that requires a skill set beyond finance. And so, look, I hope people try to follow, and I hope people in finance value the importance of innovation. But I can tell you it's not an easy problem to solve, which is why we think LQD is in a really good position to really be a leader on this.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about you for a moment here.
Sure.
In July of 2020, there was an announcement that you were accepted into the Forbes Finance Council, which is an invitation-only community for executives in accounting, financial planning, wealth, asset management, and investment firms. Can you tell us a little bit about this council and how this will enable you to bring even more creative solutions to the finance industry?
Yeah, so, the Forbes Council really is a unique group of thought leaders in different areas. And it's designed to give business people, finance professionals, an insight, a very practical, tangible insight into meaningful questions about governing their finances or finding the right accountant or planning, from a cash flow perspective, right? One of the things that so I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, and I've been fortunate enough in that process to be able to learn some of the finer points of high finance and things that you would normally pick up if you went to Wharton and then worked at a Wall Street bank and that sort of a thing. And I've been fortunate, but I also tell people that I've made more mistakes than anybody, and I regret every mistake I made because I would much rather have never made a mistake in my life, right? So in that sense, I'd rather have not made mistakes, but I have taken something from every one of those mistakes. And so if I can do something to help other business owners, other entrepreneurs empower themselves and to be successful without having to go undergo some of the friction and some of the challenges that I faced in my career, then I find that is a great thing to do, because in my opinion, the more entrepreneurs we have, the more empowered business people we have, the better we off as a society, because that's the single greatest way to develop wealth, is to be an entrepreneur and not just, work for a big corporation.
Well, that's great, George. That wraps up my questions for today. And I really want to thank you for your time today and spending time telling us a little bit about the platform that you're building and also a little bit about the Forbes Council. I think this is important. I hope that things continue to go well for you. It sounds like you're on the cutting edge of what needs to be happening in the future of this industry. And thanks very much for your time today. And we hope that you and your team continue to prosper and do well.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Have a good day.